Hey, this is Ike. I'm continuing my progression through the limits series today with a 1-2-6 max no limit video on stars. And here we go. 7's easy cold call in position here. I would need at least 10's, probably jacks, to be 3-betting there, and I'm not folding any pair. It's a good flop for us. We've got the overpair and the gut shot. So I'm going to go ahead and bet when jack 2 here. If I were to get raised on this board, I'd probably just stack it off. I think there's a decent chance that a check raise there is a bluff. So I have some fold equity. There's a decent chance that if I get called, it's a hand like 5-4, 6-4, 6-7, something like that I'm actually ahead of. And even against an overpair, I'm a 6-out hand plus the backdoor flush draw is probably worth about 7 outs. It's not a terrible spot against aces even. And of course, the check raise, even though I don't think it's a good play with a flush draw, I think the check raise often is a flush draw there. So I would have stacked it off if I got raised. I flop middle pair with the 8-7 there, but in a 4-way pot, there's just no real way to continue against that bet. Even if the guy betting out doesn't have me beat and doesn't have a big draw, there's a pretty good chance someone behind me does. John Blaze limped with a short stack there, reasonable chance he has an overpair or a set, or just a good 10. Or pocket 8s. No, even that was ahead of me. They both had me smashed on that board. Go ahead and open the king 9 suited there. I think that's not at all close. If you've been watching my videos, you know I'm opening any suited king there. I'm very happy to have king 9. And I don't really consider continuing against 3-raise there, against an unknown. With some history, that's the sort of hand that I might consider making a small 4-bet as a bluff with. Now, this guy 3-bets me a second time, and I decide that here the best option is to 4-bet small and stack it off. I don't think that folding is really an option when he 3-bets me twice in a row and I have jacks here. With even 10s, I'd consider folding, but jacks just too good to really let it go, I think. You're just folding far too often if you fold jacks there. So the choices then are between overbet shoving, making a small raise and stacking off, or calling. That time I opted to make a small raise and stack off because I thought there was a chance he would get stubborn and 5-bet all in with a medium pair or an ace-high hand that he otherwise would have folded to the overbet shove, and because I don't love flatting jacks and playing them out of position against an unknown there. Too many things can go wrong, and I don't have a good idea of what his range is to be 3-betting me in the first place, or how he's going to play post-flop. So I think that ending the hand pre-flop is the right decision, and that 4-betting small and calling the 5-bet is preferable to overbet shoving. I do not think that 4-betting small and folding is an option at all. If we're going to be doing that with any hand, it should not be jacks. I don't think the 4-bet gets called, so turning a hand as good as jacks into a bluff is silly. If we don't want to stack the jacks off pre-flop, we should just call them and then make small bluff 4-bets with crappy hands. Now in this queen 9 hand, I raised with the poster behind me, check called the flop, and I'm just check folding this turn, though At the time, I definitely considered making it 60 over his bet of 18 on the turn there and shoving the river. I think that with a bit more history with an opponent against somebody who has a bit of respect for my game and doesn't think and has reason to think I'm not just randomly spewing, I'm going to pause and finish talking about that hand. Right, so against somebody who has played with me a bit before, I would definitely think that I'd have a shot at getting them off a bad ace with a small check raise on the turn and a river shove. I think I can very credibly represent king-jack or any of the boats. But against an unknown, I think I'm probably getting called down by a bad ace too much there. Now, to catch up with the action that's going on right now, I opened this jack-8 suited and got called by the short stack from the blinds. I flopped a pair, he checked, and I don't really see any options other than shoving here. I think I'll get called by worse sometimes. You know, 7s and 6s would be the main worse hands that would be likely to call. Also, ace-high hands will call somewhat often if he's somehow gotten into this spot with queen 10, jack 10, queen jack, something like that, or some diamonds, he's likely to call that. And, of course, I'm going to take it down against random overs a decent amount, too. So, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and shove the jack 8 there. And now, with the ace 10, I flopped the nuts here, and I could check or I could lead out. This is the sort of board where players check back one pair hands pretty often if he has king 10, queen 10, jack 10, anything like that. I think that it's very likely he'll check back with any of those, and that's not particularly good for me because so many cards can come to either split the pot or kill my action. Also, ace-king, ace-queen, ace-jack all seem like hands he's likely to check behind with. If I lead out, I think that it's very probable he stacks off any two-pair or set on the flop, which is great news. So the decision between leading out and going for the check raise basically comes down to how often I think he's going to c-bet bluff with a total miss on this board, because I think I'm going to stack two-pair or a set with either line. So it comes down to how often he's going to c-bet a total bluff on this board versus how much more I make against various one-pair hands by leading out. And I think that maybe he'll c-bet a total miss on this board, but that I make a lot more against one-pair hands by getting a bet in on the flop, so that then I can get big bets in on the turn and river, and make him make a hard decision with a hand like ace-king. Anyway, resuming the video. I just took it down with my lead out, so if he was going to c-bet there, I lost the amount that he was going to c-bet by leading out, but I still think it was the right play. And so my jack 8 got called by jack 10 up there. Obviously, a good outcome. Not so much when he improved on the turn, but then I got a little resuck in on the river, so I win that one. These 8s are a tricky spot. I think this is just about exactly the border between pocket pairs I want to be calling versus 3-betting there. 8s, I think, could really go either way. 9s, I'm pretty certain I want to be 3-betting. 7s, I'm pretty certain I want to be calling. Now, that flop, betting doesn't seem to serve much purpose. He's never going to fold better. He's not going to call many worse hands. He's going to shove a range I can't call against, but which contains a bunch of semi-bluffs. So I check the flop, intending to maybe check call one street and check fold the next, or something like that. And now this outcome where it gets checked down and I beat, he ends up having ace 3 here, and I beat ace-3 is a very good outcome. He had the nut flush draw there. If I bet the flop, he probably shoves, and I probably can't call. So, keeping the pot small there certainly worked out. My king-9 suited gets 3-bet by that guy again. He seems to be 3-betting me pretty liberally, but the one time I got in, he did have kings. I'm definitely thinking a bit harder about making a small 4-bet bluff here, but I decide to not do it. In retrospect, I actually am not so sure what I think of my decision not to bluff 4-bet there. I think that because the last time he 3-bet me, he got it in good, he probably thinks I'm going to be a little bit disinclined to play back at him, and that actually might have made an otherwise marginal spot a good spot. And I think that I probably should have made it like 60 or so there. Now this king-queen, I was going to call Mike the Cat's 3-bet there, but once the short stack moves in behind him, it's an easy fold. I think the short stack's range to shove behind raise and re-raise there is probably no looser than 9s plus, ace-queen plus, and maybe tighter than that even. So the range I would be stacking off there is probably jacks plus and ace-king. I like raising the limp there with the queen-jack. I raise probably more than half my hands in the big blind if the small blind limps with no history. And then I c-bet most flops once I have. That's not at all a good card to continue betting on once he's called the flop. It seems relatively unlikely he'll fold the turn there. The king now is a pretty good bluff card. My range to bet the flop and then check back the turn involves a lot of king-high hands, so it's very believable that I hit that river. It's also somewhat believable that I checked back a mediocre 10 on the turn and am now value betting it on the river, which is further reason that he should consider folding a hand worse than a pair of 10s there. And I think the bluff will succeed pretty often. This ace-jack suited hand is a good example of something I've talked about a bunch in previous videos, which is making decisions based on very limited stats on an opponent. Against a player who is genuinely a 42-42, I'm going to pause for a second here. Against a player who's genuinely 42-42, as my stats on Neo indicate, that's a spot where I think I should be 3-betting for value, expecting to be called by a bunch of worse hands. But because I only have 12 hands on him, I'm going to assume that my stats actually overrepresent how loose he is, that he's really opening maybe somewhere in the low 30% of his hands total, and that I probably do better at cold calling the ace-jack suited here. Now I've also up here raised the aces again from the small to big against Multitumen 2, or whatever that name is, and he has played me quite stubbornly so far. He's been 3-betting me a bunch, and in general, I think that he's either just an all-around stubborn, aggressive player, or that he, in particular, either recognizes my name or for some other reason assumes that I'm playing very loose and aggressive and that he has to play back against me. So I'm going to be looking to get a lot of value out of these aces, even if the board comes off scary. I'm going to be betting them strongly and expecting to get called down by a lot of one-pair hands and bluff raised a decent amount. So I go ahead and bet the flop with the aces. Bet the turn with the aces. More big bets. Now that's one of the worst rivers I could hit. At least it wasn't a diamond, but it's not good. But even still, I'm just going to keep firing here. I think I can still get called by a lot of hands, like an 8 with any kicker, 9, jack, queen, king, ace. Pocket pairs, ace 7, ace 5. I think he can call me real wide there. And of course I am going to be folding if he shoves, but I think that it's probably right to go for the thin value on that river. Maybe it's too thin, maybe I'm getting folds from most of the one-pair hands that I'm hoping will call me, in which case I think the line is to check fold. I can bet there or I can check fold. I think check calling is awful. I think that when I check and he bets, he's basically never bluffing, and not definitely, but very rarely value betting worse. The only way I can see him value betting worse is if he has somehow gotten to that point with a 10 with a good kicker, or an overpair. If he slow played jacks plus and got to that spot, I could see him finding a value bet with those. So, like, king 10 or better, if he has it there, he might be betting, but I just don't see him having it that often. So, relative to the two-pair and straight hands he can have, it's an easy check fold over check call, but betting might be better. So I open that 9-8 suited, get called, flop flush draw, c-bet, turn a gut shot, and I'm just going to keep firing here, and there's a decent chance I'll fire river too if I'm called in river blanks. It depends on the river card. Some are better to bet than others. An ace or a king is obviously a pretty good card to bet there. Pairing the board is pretty bad. I'd be disinclined to fire another barrel if any of the cards on the board paired. Basically just looking for anything that makes any hand I can conceivably have fired two barrels with improve. And I'll continue betting on those and check it back on the really bad cards, mainly board pairing and a deuce or a 3. While I was talking about that, a hand happened over on the bottom right. Pointing at the monitor really doesn't help. I was about to say over here. Over on the bottom right, a hand happened where I raise king 7 suited from the button, get called, and flop the nut flush draw on the ace-high board and just check it down against Yanir. I think that was definitely the right way to play that hand. I think that there's almost no point in betting. I'm just going to get raised off my hand pretty often, and I'm very rarely going to fold out better. I don't know, if he has a small pair of some sort, I have a decent chance of folding it out, but other than that. Okay, so this 6-7 hand in the upper right, I'm going to pause for a second. It was a limped pot pre, and then John Blaze led out on the flop for 4, and the El Pinos called, and I decided to make it 16 here. I think that because John Blaze didn't raise after the button limped and I limped the small blind, it's basically impossible for him to have ace-queen, set of queens, or set of aces. So the only strong hand he can have here, really, is set of threes or ace three. And, like, he could have an ace with a decent kicker or something like that, but I don't think he's going to go broke in a limped pot with a hand like that. And likewise, El Pinos is somewhat more believably could have ace-queen or one of the sets, but the fact that he didn't raise Blaze's bet on this fairly drawy board, I think, reduces the chance that that's the case. So I'm basically just going to throw my whole stack in there here, and if they don't have two pair or better, I don't think they're going to call me down. And I think that they very rarely have two pair or better, so I think that I'm going to be winning this pot a very large percentage of the time. Now, they both call me on the flop, but even still, I think that Blaze probably has one pair aces or a flush draw, and that El Pinos' most likely hand, I think, is probably one pair aces on the flop, or even a pair of queens. He's very loose pre, doesn't seem particularly good. Fire the turn, get called, and I'm just shoving the river. I think there's a pretty good chance he called the turn with any sort of pair and gut shot type of hand. Also, now that the flush draw has gotten in, there's a reasonable chance he could even fold two pair, I think. It's possible he hit the flush, and in that case I'm getting called. And, of course, the actual outcome where he turns the two pair with ace-10 is totally plausible. But I think that if he had had ace-king, ace-jack, ace-9, he likely calls flop and turn and folds river. I think he's just about as likely to have those hands as to have ace-10 or ace-queen or ace-3. So, based on pre-flop, just as likely to have those hands. And then once the other cards show up on the board and he fails to raise post-flop, I think it reduces the chances he has two pair. I think that up until the point that I see his hand on the river, the most likely possibility is that he has just one pair of aces and that I'm getting the fold on the river. So I'm happy with how I played that hand, and basically I think he had to hit his two pair of trips to get to showdown against me there. So it's sort of strange to think of yourself as having gotten sucked out on when you have 7 high, no draw, but that's really pretty much what happened, is that he needed to improve to get to showdown, and he got lucky to improve, and I was going to win the hand more likely than not if he didn't. Not much happened for a few minutes there after that big bluff, so I skipped ahead a little bit here, and now I've got a couple hands coming up. Button opens, and with these 8s, it's somewhat close between calling and re-raising pre-flop. It definitely would be okay to just stack the 8s off pre against a guy with only 50 big blinds, but I decided to just call and play him post-flop. I think with 10s, it's pretty clearly a stack off pre. 8s and 9s, I think you can go either way with, and I opted to call them here. Flop was a pretty standard check call. He made a very small bet. Now turn, he underbet again, and I was somewhat close to finding the fold on the turn, but I decided that for almost 4-1, it was right to call the 10 there and see what happens on the river. I was intending to fold if another bet went in on the river, but as it went, he checked it back, and my 8s were good. 7s in the lower left here, I decided just to re-raise because the button's short stacked. Now, I got called by the small blind. I was planning on folding if the small blind shoved on me, which makes the smaller re-raise size better, because I save money when I do fold to his push. But it does cause him to call more often, which could go either way with a pretty mediocre hand like sevens. I probably prefer to take it down pre-flop than play a flop against a hand like Jack 10. And as that played out, I'm happy with all the decisions I made post-flop, but that river card was really pretty much the worst in the deck, and I don't think I was even calling another barrel on a relatively good river. Though actually, if the river comes off low, maybe I am calling another barrel there, because it's a pretty thin value bet for him to be betting something like 10-9 on the end there. So I'm really only losing to sets and overpairs and two-pair hands if the river's a low card. And I'm picking off all sorts of two Broadway hands that are bluffing. So actually, I think maybe the river is a call on a blank, but on the Queen of Hearts, that's maybe literally the worst card in the deck. So easy fold on that card. Just hits everything. Playing the sevens here against this raise is a real tricky spot. I don't think I can 3-bet. Or rather, if I did, it would be pretty much a pure bluff. I would be totally screwed if he continues against me. And if I totally believed these stats, that he was a genuine 11-11, if I had that over hundreds of hands, I would probably just fold. And even as is, folding certainly can't be wrong by much and might just be right. But I decided I'd call. And now when the flop checks through, I think I'm taking it down with a turn bet a lot here. I think scat tilt has eights through kings a lot here and won't call two barrels. Also has just a total miss a lot and didn't c-bet. And I don't know what he had, but sure enough, I do take it down. Queen 10 suited, easy call there. Crappy flop. I have a pair, but it's nothing good. I'm check folding. Still check folding. That's a very good river, and I'm considering value betting here, but I end up deciding against it, and I'm checking, probably intending to call most bets. If they bet particularly large, or if I felt like I got a good read off the timing, I might consider a fold, but yeah, everybody else had ace high. I don't think I'm getting called if I bet. Against a different first limper, even than a short-stacked one, I might raise that ace-7. But against a relatively tight and short-stacked limper, I think I'm getting shoved on a ton if I raise there. And even if I get called, it's a pretty bad spot. I probably would have needed... I think I might have limped ace-10 and raised ace-jack in that spot. I think I'm folding ace-9. I might have limped ace-9, too. Ace-7. I think pretty clear fold. Great flop for the queens. Obviously just going to bet here and probably bet and get in on most turns. That's not an especially good turn. It's not an especially bad one, but a bunch of hands just improved to beat me. A bunch of other hands just lost a lot of their outs. 6x and 5x are no longer drawing to 2-pair to beat me. I decided to check it back and plan on calling a shove on a blank river and betting if checked too. Now he underbets here, and I'm thinking about value shoving. I think there's a reasonable chance he's a 10 or a 6 or 7s, 8s, or 9s, something like that. But I also think that he is a better hand than me a decent amount, and sure enough, he's the nut flush. So just calling was, well, given that he had the nut flush, just calling was obviously better than raising. But I think just calling was the right decision there. I think that of the times I'm called, if I ship it in there, I am not good more than half. So I think calling is better than raising. As far as the decision about whether to bet or check behind on the turn, I think I'm happy with the decision I made there too. I think that there's a good chance I'm more likely to get paid off by a mediocre one-pair hand after I check back turn and then shove river, assuming river is a relatively safe card, meaning basically any card 10 or lower, particularly non-heart. But there's no particularly compelling reason for him to put me on hearts. On the other hand, he's probably not good enough to be thinking about it that way. So maybe a heart is a scary card for him. If he checked on that 10 of hearts, I was certainly shoving. But heart might be a bit of a scare card for him. In any case, I'm shoving if checked too there, and I expect to be called by a one-pair hand at least as often as I would be on the turn. And I also give him the opportunity to bluff shove on me if he's on some sort of draw that doesn't get there. If he's 7-8 or something like that. If he's 7-8 and shoving the river pretty often when he misses, I actually do better by a lot by checking back the turn and letting him bluff shove the river than by betting the turn and forcing him to fold. Of course, if he'll just call off the open-ended straight draw, then I should be shoving the turn. But I don't really think that guy has given me any reason to believe he'd do anything that silly. This 8-6 hand, could certainly be betting here, but I'm opting just to check call. If I were betting, I would be pretty much turning my hand into a semi-bluff, intending on firing multiple streets later. Instead, I'm checking, trying to keep the pot small, and playing my hand more or less as a bluff catcher. In this case, it worked out poorly because he had the king-6 suited, put in one value bet, and then checked back the remaining streets. And if I had bet flop and turn, I'd probably blow him off that hand. So, given that he had exactly that, I would have done better to be betting, but with so much of his range being two crappy overcards, I think I like inducing bluffs by checking there more than I like turning my own relatively strong hand into a semi-bluff by betting. It's a tricky spot and one where you have to sort of make that decision between, do I want my mediocre one-pair hand to be a semi-bluff or a bluff catcher, because you can't it's not strong enough to really try and get value out of it by betting it. You're not really going to get called down by worse. So you have to figure out if you're going to try and get them to put in money with worse by check calling it, or if you're going to try and get them to fold better by betting it. And betting it would, in order to get them to fold better, necessarily mean betting at least two streets and probably all three there. I think the 10s are a 3-bet here because there's a weak short-stacked player on the button who I have a pretty good chance of getting my stack in very good against. If all 3 of the opponents involved there have full stacks, I'm much more inclined to just call the 10s, but would be 3-betting jacks no matter what. With the somewhat short-stacked player in there, I'm probably 3-betting even 9s, but probably not 8s. These 10s, I think, are pretty close against Multitumen because he's been playing me pretty hard. I think I could actually 3-bet him there and be pretty happy getting my 10s in, but instead I'm just going to call them and play them passively, but with no intention of folding here, because he doesn't seem to like losing pots. So, I check call flop, check call again on turn, I fill up on the river, and I feel like I gave off a bit of a timing tell here, which sucks. I thought longer than I normally would after spiking my 10, and he instantly checked it back with the king 7 there. So I feel kind of dumb about that. I should have thought for either more or less time on the river there, I think. I would have been much more likely to induce the 3rd barrel of bluff there, if I had. In any case, that's sort of instructive because it's a good example of sort of timing tell to be looking for in both your own play and your opponent's play, where a card hits that could reasonably improve a player's hand, and they think for just slightly longer than you would expect them to before checking, there is a higher than usual chance that the card did in fact improve their hand, and that they had to decide whether they were going to bet it or go for the check, intending to either check raise or check to induce the bluff. Of course, you can get that timing tell wrong. It can actually have been that they checked, that they saw the card, and then it didn't actually improve them. They were just thinking about whether or not they should bluff it. But you can very often get a read off of someone's timing when a scare card hits that can tell you, not with certainty, but with a useful degree of accuracy, that it is likely the card improved their hand. Anyway, the video is just about coming to a close here. These deuces are going to be my last hand, I think. And I get called. Flop comes down pretty dry, and I opt to just check it back, try and check it down and see if my deuces are good here. And it turns out he has 8s. After seeing that huge bluff I ran earlier, it's unlikely he would have folded that to 1. It's very unlikely he would have folded that to 1 barrel, and I'm not sure even if 2 or 3 would have done it, given the way the board came out. So, given that I didn't even have a draw, that I wasn't going to be semi-bluffing, it would just be a pure bluff if I was betting there, and that it would require multiple barrels to have any chance of succeeding him and blowing him off any pair, I think. I'm happy with my decision to check it down, and I think that I'm going to beat an ace-high hand or something like that there reasonably often, but as it turned out, he had 8, so I lose. In any case, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please leave me some comments in the forums. Good luck in all your games.